Now, what's a myofiber and myofibril? So you might notice, okay, these sound very similar. They both start with myofib something, but what the thing is that myo refers to muscle, and this is pretty consistent. So it's a prefix often used to denote that something is related to muscle. Now, sarco is also something that you might find referring to muscle, but it actually means body. So sometimes you find things that are, it says sarco, but it's not necessarily about talking about muscle. Now, site, we should be very familiar with that, is that site, whenever you see, or cyto, that is that root word meaning cell, right? So when you have a myocyte, you have a muscle cell. So myocyte is a muscle cell. And basically with the muscle cell, you also in terms of skeletal muscles, when they have a bunch of these muscle cells fusing together, they form a muscle fiber. So a muscle fiber is actually an elongated muscle cell. And then myofiber referring to the same thing. So myofiber, muscle cell, myocyte. So I might use these interchangeably, but in the literature, in terms of skeletal muscle, these all refer to the same thing. Now, myofiber is an elongated and muscle cell, and actually is what we call multinucleated. So in this case, nucleus is referring to a cell nucleus. So this is one cell, but it has multiple nucleuses, or actually the correct plural is nuclei. So there are multiple nuclei in the same cell, and I'll get to how that happens really shortly. Now, myofibril doesn't refer to the entire cell, it refers to these structures of these protein filaments we call thick and thin filaments. So myofibrils are proteins, myofibers are the entire muscle cell. So it sounds similar, but watch out, they're not the same. Myofibrils are smaller than myofibers. So there's multiple myofibrils that can be inside one myofiber. Okay, so muscle cells, it's funny like that. Oh, it's a little overlap here, but myo means muscle, and myocyte is a muscle cell, which is the same as a myofiber, muscle fiber, and myofiber. And again, myofiber is not the same thing as a myofibril. This is a cell, this is a protein, or a structure of proteins, actually, I should say. So you have you can have multiple myofibrils inside one myofiber. So I'm representing all these like myofibrils inside one myofiber. Now, what we have is that, notice that we have a bunch of bundles of these contractile proteins stacked and packed into this one cell. So the other thing is that these cells, this is the thing with skeletal muscle, you have these like basically all these little tubes packed into groups of other tubes, packed in more groups of other tubes and other tubes. So this is kind of how skeletal muscles are organized. There are all these bundles of fibers wrapped and grouped into bunches. And here we have a muscle fiber or myofiber, so that's what we have here. And myofibrils, all these myofibrils stacked in one muscle fiber. Now, what we can have is a bunch of when you have a bunch of these muscle fibers or myofibers, or actually, rewind a bit. So they're actually surrounded by this connective tissue we call endomysium. So this helps to wrap and protect, and it also helps, what we see are these blood vessels. So all these blood vessels in this connective tissue are supported by this connective tissue that surrounds each individual muscle fiber. Now over here we have multiple muscle fibers. So in this image we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 8 muscle fibers, and they're held together in another bundle we call a fascicle. So a fascicle has multiple of these muscle fibers, and so these are individual cells that all have their individual endomysium, but around every fascicle we have something called a perimysium. So perimysium, again, when you see that prefix meaning peri, that means something surrounding something. So in this case we have a perimysium surrounding a fascicle. So a single perimysium surrounding each fascicle, and each fascicle is made up of multiple muscle fibers. And over here, now we're talking about the entire muscle organ, sometimes called a muscle belly. And what we have are multiple fascicles stacked together in bundles, tightly packed bundles. And this is what do we have surrounding a muscle belly or muscle organ is what we call an epimysium. And again, epi meaning outer, so this is the outermost connective tissue surrounding a skeletal muscle. So again, this is where it can get potentially confusing because peri, we usually think, oh, that means surrounding something, therefore it's the outermost layer. But it's kind of like peri's in the middle in this case. It's surrounding something, but surrounding that intermediate structure we call a fascicle. But remember that endo means inner. So epi means outer, endo means inner. So the outermost is the epi, the epimysium. The innermost is the endomysium, and peri is in the middle. So this is what we have. So again, multiple layers of organization, and they're all basically all these cylindrical structures and fibers, like structures stacked into bigger and bigger bundles, and then we finally have a skeletal muscle, or a typical skeletal muscle. So myofibrils, these are protein complexes that are stacked inside these muscle fibers, or myofibers, muscle cells. And then when you have a group of muscle cells organized in one perimysium, you get a muscle fascicle. And when you have multiple muscle fascicles forming an entire muscle organ, this is what we call, muscle, skeletal muscle. And just like we have multiple fibers showing going from small to large, we also have layers of connective tissue. So again, the endomysium, the innermost and smallest, and then we have the perimysium that surrounds each fascicle, and then we have the epimysium that surrounds each muscle organ, or sometimes muscle belly. Okay, so I think this is a pretty nice topic. So levels of organization, and this actually pays off later on. So you start off big. The biggest level is that each muscle organ is made out of fascicles, and each muscle fascicle is made out of cells, these myofibers. And each myofibers has multiple myofibrils that are the proteins that contract and help a muscle cell to contract and shorten. So this is what we have. And we have an epimysium surrounding each muscle organ, and then the perimysium surrounding each fascicle, and then we have the endomysium surrounding each myofiber.